This man was cursed to be trapped in the tutorial tower for 12 years. Every time he cleared the final floor, he was sent back to the beginning. After hundreds of attempts, he grew frustrated and gave up. On his 433rd attempt, he even disguised himself as a beginner guide NPC, and by the 512th attempt, he became a training instructor just for fun. Without realizing it, 12 years had passed, until suddenly, a notification appeared. The curse will be lifted if you clear the tower this time. Could this finally be his freedom? But how did it all begin? One day, monsters began appearing all around the world, bringing destruction and panic. At the same time, a mysterious structure emerged, and people called it the Tutorial Tower. For the first time, humanity had to face this tower. Without mercy, the tower transported people from all over the world into it, forcing them to face brutal trials. Age, physical condition, or background didn't matter. The success rate for exiting the tower was only 20%, and those who succeeded were called hunters, humans with extraordinary abilities who became the new hope for mankind. For 12 years, the Tutorial Tower remained a mystery. However, when it was finally conquered for the first time, the world changed. Hunters became symbols of power and the new idols of society. Their fame and wealth rivaled that of celebrities. Nations began to consider hunters as a factor of national strength. To protect them, hunter associations and guilds were formed to maintain stability. In a famous television show all about hunters, the host introduced three special guests, the leaders of the best guilds in Korea: Seo Kwan-han from Guild Goryeo, Seo Yong-lee from Guild Orangs, and Si-hyun Kim from Guild Seoul. The program gained massive popularity, with a rating of 35.7% last week. During the last segment of the show, the host asked the most frequently asked question from viewers. It's said there's a master who still lives in the Tutorial Tower in Korea. Who is this master? The three guests looked surprised hearing the question. The host continued, mentioning that he had read stories about this master online. He then asked, "Do the guild leaders know who this master is?" With a smile, Seo Kwan-han replied, "There's been a lot of news about him lately. It seems he's not dead and is still alive." His answer indicated that he knew who the master was. Seo Yong-lee added, "Everyone knows about him. He entered the tower with us in the first wave, 12 years ago." Si-hyun Kim said that it might be a curse because only this master never left the tower. He completed every level only to return to the first and repeat it. The host tried to confirm, so this person entered the tower in the first wave, 12 years ago, and kept completing it over and over. The three of them nodded in agreement. Then the question arose, if the purpose of entering the tower was to gain power, would someone who has completed it multiple times have unimaginable strength? Some hunters who came out of the tower shared stories about this individual. They had seen the master complete the tutorial floor in just one day, an impossible feat. They suspected his power surpassed that of a normal hunter, possibly even on the level of rank A or S. However, even after conquering the tower, this person stayed inside and kept repeating it tirelessly. In one story, a party was seen running in fear, chased by a huge monster. But in the middle of the hallway, a man stood still, not moving at all. Suddenly, a massive explosion echoed, destroying the walls around him. Yet, the man remained standing fearlessly. Soon, a notification appeared. Tutorial Tower Level 100, monster for the final test. Before the man, a terrifying figure appeared, a giant monster named Baylock. Many believed that if this man left the tower, he would undoubtedly become one of the strongest hunters. However, rumors about him continued to spark debates. Some claimed to have seen the master defeat 3 werewolves alone at level 72, or kick a level 10 monster with ease. But many believed these stories were just myths. In reality, the man fought Baylock using only his feet. He stepped on the monster's head, smiling with a psychopathic expression. In just 3 seconds, Baylock was defeated. A notification appeared. Baylock defeated with the final blow. Casually, the man stepped on the fallen monster's body, wondering to himself, what else should I do to make this more interesting? Over the last 12 years, the time it takes for prospective hunters to complete the tutorial tower has gotten shorter. The tutorial tower across the world has the same content, so there have been no significant changes in the challenges faced. Because of this, each time a new group of hunters manages to make it out, information about their strategies and attack methods spreads worldwide. Many countries have raced to share this information to improve the survival chances of participants and to create the best hunters. However, despite more refined strategies and broader knowledge, only a few manage to conquer the tower. When prospective hunters reach level 99, they face the final trial, Baylock, the ruler of the tutorial tower. This terrifying monster has become a nightmare for many. Of the 95 participants who managed to reach this level, only 25 made it out alive, while the rest lost their lives. Baylock became a symbol of fear and an almost impossible challenge to overcome. However, there was one figure who was different. He was a man known as the Master, someone who had completed the tutorial tower 1,349 times. Standing in front of the exit portal of the tower, he closed his eyes, hoping that this time he could finally leave. But, as always, when he opened his eyes, he was back at the first level. The conquest began again. The This time, it was his 1,350th. Seeing this reality, he could only laugh bitterly. Frustrated, he shouted, wanting to go home, wanting to leave the tower. But his cries echoed in vain. He collapsed, lying on the ground, staring blankly at the information screen. His name was Hyunwoo Kim. He was 24 years old. In his heart, he thought repeating this over and over would no longer bring any new experiences. There were no more challenges, only the emptiness that kept repeating. 12 years ago, when Hyunwoo and his team first entered the tutorial tower, everything felt different. They were the first group to successfully reach level 100. Standing in front of the portal, they laughed happily, confident that their struggle was over. They promised each other to stay in touch in the outside world. But something strange happened. When Hyunwoo stepped into the portal, he suddenly found himself back at the first level. His friends were nowhere to be seen, and he was alone. Confusion turned into frustration as he realized he was trapped in the tower. In the subsequent repeats, he began to realize that he gained new abilities. But along with that, he also received the tower's curse. This curse prevented him from leaving. The only way to lift it was to complete the tower alone, without anyone's help. He tried everything. In the first 10 repeats, Hyunwoo strengthened himself, pushing his abilities to their maximum. In the end, even the stone pillars in the tower could be easily destroyed. But every time he reached level 100 and defeated Balok, he would always return to the first level. 5 years passed. In desperation, Hyunwoo tried everything to break the curse, but all his efforts were in vain. Eventually, he began to accept his fate. In repeat 433, he tried role-playing as an NPC, helping other participants who had just entered the tower. In repeat 512, he became an instructor, training new hunters to survive. However, there was one thing he couldn't stand, hearing stories about the outside world from participants who were about to leave. Every time he heard those stories, the feeling of isolation haunted him even more. Time passed, and Hyunwoo went through repeat after repeat without purpose, until finally, 12 years had passed. When he opened the information screen, he didn't expect anything to change. However, this time there was a new message that surprised him. The system notified him that Hyunwoo had completed the tower and was finally able to leave. Hyunwoo remained silent. After a moment, he smiled, then burst into joyful laughter. With the passion that had long been lost, he prepared to conquer the tower once again, this time for the last time. With burning determination, he took his stance, shot forward, and began tearing through each level of the tower at an incredible speed. Now, there was only one thing on his mind: the freedom he had been waiting for. Generally, the fastest time to complete the tutorial tower is around 10 months. In a popular TV program, the host asked whether the hunters from the 18th wave could break that record. Sao Young Lee explained that the number of hunters entering each wave differs, and the outcome heavily depends on their power combinations. Changes in strategy and results would occur frequently. Sehyun Kim added that success also depends on the individual and the effectiveness of their attacks. Seo Kwan Han interjected that the real challenge begins after level 51, as from that point, bosses with higher difficulty levels appear every 10 levels. He emphasized that from there on, luck no longer plays a role. Meanwhile, Hyunwoo, with renewed energy, continued charging forward, breaking through each level without concern for the monsters in his way. He pressed on relentlessly until he finally reached level 99. There, he stood calmly, facing Balok, the ruler. With all his strength, he struck the monster with such a devastating blow that the effects were even visible from outside the tower. The next day, in Hangdong District, Cheonho, at the entrance management area of the tutorial tower, a dimensional portal suddenly appeared. This event caused a stir at the monitoring office managed by the Korean Hunter Association. The association quickly prepared a list of names for the 18th wave participants to record who successfully made it out. From the portal emerged a human figure. It was Hyunwoo. He stepped out, looking around with a relieved expression. The towering buildings in front of him were a clear sign that he had finally made it out of the tower. Hyunwoo chuckled softly, surveying his surroundings, ensuring he was truly back in the outside world. Soon after, an association officer approached him to congratulate him on his success in leaving the tower. Hyunwoo turned to him, double-checking by asking if he had really made it out. The officer, though confused, confirmed that Hyunwoo had indeed exited the tower. Hearing this, Hyunwoo beamed, his eyes welling up. He shouted joyfully, "I'm out! Hyunwoo Kim is back." The association officer, hearing his name, immediately checked the list of the 18th wave participants, but Hyunwoo Kim's name was not there. Curious, he checked the first wave list. That's when he found Hyunwoo's name at the top. The officer was stunned to realize that the person in front of him was the legendary figure known as the Master, who had finally exited the tower after 12 years. A week later, the world's attention turned to Korea. People from all over the globe flocked to the tutorial headquarters, where the first evaluation of the 18th wave hunters would take place. This wave attracted attention because the world record for completing the tower was shattered, with a time of just 2 weeks. However, the main spotlight was still on Hyunwoo, the master hunter. In the evaluation waiting room, the 18th wave hunters appeared busy preparing themselves. They wore the basic gear provided earlier for the exam. But in the corner of the room, Hyunwoo sat relaxed, casually snacking without any gear on. The other participants felt confused and uncomfortable seeing Hyunwoo's relaxed attitude. Not realizing the situation, Hyun-woo asked one of the participants, "What is everyone wearing?" The participant explained that the gear had been distributed earlier that morning and was crucial for the exam. Without the gear, the exam would be much more difficult. Hyun-woo simply scratched his head, guessing he hadn't received the gear because he had overslept. Suddenly, an announcement echoed, instructing the participants to head to the exam location. The exam area was a special labyrinth designed by the Seoul Tutorial Center to evaluate the hunters' ranks. There, an examiner named David, an A-class hunter, stood in front of the participants. In a loud voice, he announced that the rank evaluation would begin soon. David informed the participants that the eyes of the world were on them. Some participants seemed burdened by the pressure. Seeing this, David smiled and tried to ease the tension. He explained that they didn't need to be overly nervous because compared to the challenges of the tutorial tower, this exam was just a formality to certify them as hunters. At the back of the room, Hyun-woo wasn't paying attention. He yawned and appeared sleepy. David continued his explanation, introducing the first exam. As he pressed something on his phone, a violent tremor shook the ground, startling the participants. Calmly, David explained that, as hunters, they needed to be prepared for various challenges, including escaping tricky situations like the labyrinth. The tremor had turned the floor behind David into a large labyrinth. He explained that the labyrinth was filled with traps. Although the exam was just a formality, he advised the participants to use all their strength. They had 30 minutes to escape the labyrinth. The participants quickly prepared and entered the labyrinth with high spirits, running and competing to be the first to get out. Seeing their enthusiasm, David praised their excellent mindset and looked forward to the results. However, while he was still deep in thought, Hyun-woo suddenly called out to him from behind. David turned, slightly confused, and asked what Hyun-woo wanted. Calmly, Hyun-woo asked, "Can I escape the labyrinth however I want?" David, curious about this participant, lowered his sunglasses and stared at Hyun-woo closely. Seeing that Hyun-woo wasn't wearing any gear like the others, David wondered if he was serious about the exam. But, as explained earlier, David replied that as long as he could get out by any means, it was allowed. He then asked seriously, "Are you underestimating this exam?" However, Hyun-woo responded casually, telling David to focus more on the other participants who were struggling. Upon hearing this, David's anger began to show. He felt that Hyun-woo was too arrogant, but Hyun-woo remained relaxed and confidently said, "How about we bet $1,000,000? I can escape the labyrinth in 20 seconds. David furrowed his brow, not believing what he was hearing, but Hyun-woo kept provoking him. "If you're scared, maybe you shouldn't bet," he said. Feeling challenged, David reluctantly agreed to the bet, though still doubtful. Hyun-woo walked toward the nearest wall of the labyrinth, placed his hand on the wall, and got into position. His left hand touched the wall, while his right hand prepared to strike. Seriously, he exerted a small percentage of his strength. The energy pressure he unleashed was so intense that his feet sank into the floor. David, watching closely, was confused about what Hyun-woo was going to do. Even Hyun-woo's old friends, who were the leaders of Korea's top guilds, seemed puzzled by his actions. When the power in his right hand was fully gathered, Hyun-woo punched the labyrinth wall with tremendous force. The wall seemed to soften momentarily before his fist broke through. The punch caused an incredible effect, destroying the labyrinth until it pierced through to the other side. Calmly, Hyun-woo walked toward the exit he had just created. Standing casually, he said, "I'm out." The observers in the observation room were stunned by the spectacle. Even his friends started to wonder if Hyun-woo was always this casual. He smiled, imagining the 1,000,000 won he would soon earn so easily. However, that smile slowly turned into a worried expression as he thought, "Will I have to compensate for destroying the labyrinth?" Meanwhile, 24 hours before the ranking evaluation exam, at a building called Live Hunter magazine, where news about hunters is updated, journalists were discussing what interesting news they would release. In addition to talking about the master, one man suggested highlighting a person who was gaining attention as a powerful hunter from the martial arts world. That person was named Lee Kang-hyun. During the labyrinth exam earlier, Lee Kang-hyun had made up his mind to become the star. With the talent, skill, and luck he possessed, he was sure he would catch everyone's eye. When other hunters fled in fear from a giant monster before them, Kang-hyun boldly prepared to face the monster with his sword. In his mind, he believed in his abilities. As a level 4 kendo master, Lee Kang-hyun had won various international kendo competitions and was known as a tough leader. This time, he hoped to be the center of attention, believing that the path to success was wide open for him. However, his mind wandered back to his first encounter with Hyun-woo at the tower tutorial. When they first met in front of the exit portal, Hyun-woo had shouted with excitement, stealing the entire spotlight that should have been his. Kang-hyun, who felt confused and annoyed by that incident, now found himself facing Hyun-woo again in the outside world. He felt he had to compete with someone completely different from him. Meanwhile, an announcement came from the exam committee stating that, for security reasons, the first labyrinth exam would be temporarily halted. Participants were asked to return to the waiting room and wait for the rescheduled exam. Chaos erupted in the reporter's room as they scrambled to find footage of the earlier event. However, all the clear footage only showed Lee Kang-hyun. This was because, at first, no one had noticed Hyun-woo, the disheveled figure wearing flip-flops. But now, that person was the center of attention. In the participants' waiting room, the tension was palpable. Kang Hyun sat with a serious and angry expression, while Hyun Woo was peacefully asleep. The other participants whispered about the explosion caused by Hyun Woo. Some even referred to him as the Master. But in his own mind, Lee Kang-hyun was undeterred. He thought to himself that this wasn't over, and there was still a chance for him to reclaim the spotlight. Soon, another announcement came from the exam committee. The order of the ranking evaluation exams has been changed and will resume in 15 minutes. Participants are asked to prepare. Hyun Woo, who had been sound asleep, woke up with a groggy face. Meanwhile, Lee Kang-hyun remained lost in thought. He didn't care who Hyun Woo was, whether he was a master or not. Kang-hyun was confident in his own skills. This time, the exam was the Monster Wave evaluation, where participants had to fight virtual monsters created with the latest technology and magical stones. Lee Kang-hyun entered the arena with full confidence. With his sword in hand, he unleashed an incredible amount of power. Lightning struck through his sword, grabbing everyone's attention. Full of energy, Kang-hyun launched continuous attacks, cutting down the monsters that stood in his way. One by one, the monsters fell quickly. This exam required participants to defeat as many monsters as possible within the time limit. When Kang-hyun's time ran out, he had managed to defeat 78 monsters, the highest among all previous participants. Kang-hyun smiled in satisfaction. Finally, he had earned the spotlight he had long desired. The reporters watching from another room praised his greatness. However, that pride didn't last long. The next name called was Hyun Woo Kim. With a sleepy expression, Hyun Woo casually walked into the arena. Kang-hyun looked irritated by his relaxed attitude. The audience, who knew that the next contestant was the Master, was extremely curious to see his performance. Even Hyun Woo's old friends, who had once been in the same party with him, were eagerly waiting. Hyun Woo was given 2 minutes to defeat as many monsters as possible. All eyes were on him. The atmosphere grew tense, waiting for what the Master would do. The test began with numerous monsters spawning around Hyun Woo. At the same time, a 10-second countdown began, giving him time to prepare. The audience waited eagerly, still wondering what kind of action the Master would show. However, Hyun Woo, standing casually in the middle of the arena, simply sighed, unaffected by the atmosphere. Even as the timer hit 0, he remained calm and made no significant movement. When the countdown finished and the test officially began, a large orc attacked first, swinging its massive club brutally. But with incredible speed, Hyun Woo suddenly rushed toward the orc. In an instant, the orc's head was shattered. The action was so fast that it couldn't be followed by the human eye. The audience only saw the end result. The orc's head simply exploded. Only 4 seconds had passed, but the monsters around Hyun Woo had already fallen one by one. All that was visible were their heads, seemingly exploding for no reason. The audience watching this unfold began to speculate. Many thought Hyun Woo was using magic to destroy the monsters. However, in reality, Hyun Woo was attacking each monster directly, approaching them one by one and crushing their heads with a simple physical strike. There were no complicated techniques or magic behind his actions. His movements were so fast that everything seemed like an illusion. Hyun Woo's old friends watching from a distance were stunned. They wondered what Hyun Woo had actually been doing in the tutorial tower. All they knew was that Hyun Woo had always been known as a big name. But now, they realized one thing. Hyun Woo had turned into something far more terrifying. A monster in human form. When the timer hit 0, signaling the end of the test, Hyun Woo stood relaxed. In just 2 minutes, he had defeated 248 monsters. An incredible achievement. Hyun Woo's actions quickly became the center of attention. A video of his test was uploaded with the title, The Master, and it quickly went viral. Many people questioned his strength. Some even assumed that Hyun Woo was an S-class magician. Elsewhere, Lee Kang-hyun watched the news on his phone. His face turned red. His hands trembled. The spotlight he had just gained was now completely shifted to Hyun Woo. It's unfair! In his rage, he destroyed his phone, throwing it until it shattered into pieces. Not only that, but the door of his room was also destroyed, and the surrounding walls cracked. He shouted in frustration, cursing Hyun Woo as a cheater and an absurd character. I've worked so hard, fought desperately, even hunted one extra monster when the other participants were already finished. But now, all his efforts felt wasted. On the other side, Hyun Woo remained calm in his room. Suddenly, a woman named Alice came to visit him. Alice worked as an information manager and was part of the Korea Hunter Committee. She spoke at length, explaining the purpose of her visit. However, Hyun Woo, who wasn't interested, only listened half-heartedly. In short, Alice had come personally to recruit Hyun Woo to join the Ari's Guild. She handed him a contract. The contract contained the rights and responsibilities of Ari's Guild members, including payment details. When Hyun Woo read it, he was surprised by the first clause. Once the contract is signed, the down payment amount listed will be paid in full to the member. Hyun Woo counted the zeros on the number listed. The number seemed so long. Alice smiled and asked, "So, are you interested in joining?" Hyun Woo just remained silent. He couldn't even imagine what it would feel like to receive an advance payment of 10 billion won. Before that, Hyun Woo asked since when the value of Korean currency had plummeted and whether a crisis had occurred. Alice responded that While there had been difficulties due to the appearance of monsters, Korea had not experienced an economic crisis. On the contrary, land prices had actually risen. Alice showed her phone to Hyun-woo, displaying the land prices around the area where he used to live. Hyun-woo was shocked to see that the land, which was once worth 3 billion, had now risen to 13 billion. He was stunned by the revelation. Alice continued, explaining that even though land prices had increased, Hyun-woo didn't need to worry too much, because the 10 billion mentioned in the contract was just a down payment. If he decided to sign a new contract after the first one ended, he would receive twice that amount. Hyun-woo fell silent, frozen at the thought of 20 billion. Alice added that, of course, he would have to share the loot from the labyrinth with the guild, but the distribution ratio would still be overwhelmingly in his favor. With a serious expression, Hyun-woo asked if handling guild contracts like this was really part of a Hunter Committee information manager's job. Alice explained that she had personal connections with a recruiter from the Aries Guild, who had asked her to deliver this proposal. Hyun-woo recalled that contract recommendations weren't allowed during the training period. Seeing his confusion, Alice told him that he didn't need to decide right away. However, Hyun-woo immediately stated that he had already made up his mind from the start. He had no intention of joining any guild. Alice smiled wryly at his answer, thinking he was joking, but Hyun-woo assured her that he was completely serious. He had no interest in working under the constraints of a guild. Alice, still unconvinced, could only let out a small laugh. After that, Hyun-woo returned to his room. He thought about how this world operated on a give-and-take principle. There was no way they would offer 10 billion without expecting something significant in return. He was certain that accepting the money would come with many complicated obligations. He didn't like dealing with such things and only wanted to live a comfortable, carefree life, doing whatever he pleased. He recalled his earlier debate with Alice. Before she left, Alice had asked if he had any intention of working as a hunter. Hyun-woo casually replied that he had heard of hunters who worked independently. Alice immediately dismissed the idea, saying that it was impossible for a hunter to explore labyrinths alone without a guild's support. She felt that Hyun-woo was being arrogant because, in reality, it wasn't as easy as he imagined. Before leaving, Alice reminded him once again to call the number on her business card if he ever changed his mind. Hyun-woo simply waved his hand and walked away. In his room, Hyun-woo regretted the time he had wasted taking the ranking exam. He thought that if he had known about mercenary hunters earlier, he would have just slept instead of wasting his time. He checked the list of guilds that wanted to meet him and noticed a familiar name. 5 days later, on the last day of the new hunter protection period, Hyun-woo met with his 3 former party members at a Japanese restaurant in Mokdo. He was surprised to see Seo-kwan looking much older, even though they were close in age. Si-hyun Kim, who used to be a grumbling high school student, had now grown into a handsome man, and Seo-yong, who once looked plain, had completely transformed into someone unrecognizable. Hyun-woo called out to Si-hyun Kim, reminding him of how he used to whine whenever they faced the boss on the 50th floor. Si-hyun Kim panicked and got angry, frustrated that Hyun-woo only remembered the embarrassing things about him. Then, Hyun-woo turned to Seo-yong and brought up the time she wet herself on the 14th floor. Seo-yong was furious and humiliated. After that, Hyun-woo happily enjoyed the sushi in front of him, still in disbelief that he had survived 12 years in the tower without delicious food like this. Hearing that, Si-hyun Kim laughed, recalling the time on the 70th floor when they encountered a merman. Back then, Hyun-woo had been excited, thinking that the merman could be turned into sushi. They had also grown accustomed to the strange stories circulating about Hyun-woo outside the tower. Curious, Hyun-woo asked what kind of stories they meant. The 3 of them explained that he was so famous that everything he did in the tower had been broadcasted on TV. Hyun-woo was stunned, frozen at the thought that all of his actions had been widely exposed. He started wondering what kind of embarrassing moments had gone viral. It turned out that the most well-known stories were about him defeating a dungeon boss while dancing and clearing floors 1 through 10 using only kicks. With a slight sense of relief, Hyun-woo admitted that, yes, those stories were true. Si-hyun Kim, still curious, asked what exactly Hyun-woo had been doing during those 12 years in the tower. Hyun-woo started explaining that when he fought while dancing, but then he paused and continued eating his sushi. His friends fell silent, eagerly waiting for him to continue. Hyun-woo simply shrugged and said he had done it on a whim, thinking it might somehow be a way to escape. Then, he went on to talk about how he had kicked his way up to the 10th floor. At the time, he was just bored, and when he jumped, he suddenly realized he could keep going up. Seo-kwan, who had watched Hyun-woo's ranking exam, admitted that he had already thought Hyun-woo had become a monster. And now, after hearing these stories straight from him, he was even more convinced. But for Hyun-woo, his time in the tower had been nothing but frustration. He had tried every possible way to escape. After that, Hyun-woo asked if his disciple had made it out. Seo-yong was shocked to hear that Hyun-woo had a disciple. Hyun-woo then explained that back on the 50th and 60th floors, there had been a kid who got left behind in the tower. The boy had been terrified, and at the time, Hyun-woo, who was playing the role of a mysterious figure wearing a skull mask, had approached him and said, "Oh, weak human, do you wish to survive? I shall be waiting for you." With that dramatic flair, Hyun-woo claimed he had invented a new martial art and ended up taking the boy as his disciple. Seo Kwon was completely mind-blown by the story, but Hyeon Woo admitted that he had been bluffing the whole time. He actually knew nothing about martial arts. All he could do was fight with brute strength. Thinking about it now, he started feeling guilty about the boy. On top of that, his bad personality made it seem like he had no conscience. He could only hope he wouldn't run into the boy in the outside world. He didn't want to get sued. Fortunately, he had been wearing a mask back then. After chatting for a while, the four of them started discussing the world that Hyeon Woo had left behind for 12 years. Back in his room, Hyeon Woo stared at his information screen in confusion. Some of the text had disappeared, as if he had reached the tutorial limit, and the number 36, his age, was also gone. It felt like the 12 years he had spent in the tower had vanished just like that. He began to think that from now on, he should live while making money, but still doing the things he enjoyed. However, one thing puzzled him. The words "freed from repetition" were still displayed on the screen. Curious, he clicked on it. Immediately, new text appeared. To proceed to the next stage, please clear 3 new dungeon bosses: a Doron laboratory, forest village, and the invisible swamp. Hyeon Woo was still trying to figure out the details of this quest when someone called out to him from outside. He opened the door to find a hotel staff member who informed him that someone from the Aries Guild wanted to meet him. Without hesitation, Hyeon Woo told the staff to let them know he wasn't interested. However, the hotel staff, now flustered, explained that even though he refused, they were still insisting on meeting him. The staff practically begged him to at least hear them out. Realizing that this situation would only drag on if he didn't put an end to it properly, Hyeon Woo sighed. Finally, as he closed his door, he decided to meet them just once and asked the staff to lead the way. On the first floor lounge, 2 members of the Aries Guild were already waiting. The moment he arrived, Hyeon Woo made it clear that he had no intention of joining their guild. One of them, who introduced himself as the hiring manager for Aries, asked, "Will you really be okay?" Hyeon Woo frowned. "What do you mean by that?" With a condescending tone, the manager smirked. "Do you really think you can get anywhere without joining Aries? If you join us, you won't have to waste your efforts on pointless struggles." Hyeon Woo responded with a sly smile. "So, you came all this way just to threaten me?" The manager's bodyguard immediately flared up, furious at Hyeon Woo's attitude, but the manager quickly signaled for him to calm down. The manager then continued, saying that he simply hoped Hyeon Woo would take their offer seriously. He also suggested that maybe Hyeon Woo didn't know much about the Aries Guild. But before he could say anything else, Hyeon Woo cut him off. "Oh, I know plenty about Aries." He went on to explain that the Aries Guild was responsible for wiping out more than half of Korea's dungeons, widely known as a corrupt organization that abused its power. Hyeon Woo had learned this from his 3 former party members. He also pointed out that Aries controlled 66% of Korea's dungeons, particularly D-class dungeons for rookies and A-class dungeons ideal for farming. With massive foreign investments, the guild was overflowing with money. However, any rookie who wanted to succeed only had 2 choices: pay an absurdly high entry fee or join Aries. The bodyguard, unable to tolerate Hyeon Woo's insults any longer, slammed his fist on the table, shattering it instantly. The manager, still trying to maintain composure, gave Hyeon Woo a warning. "Even within the Hunter Committee, you should be careful with your words," he said. "Aries has plenty of connections there." He then once again urged Hyeon Woo to reconsider. To further intimidate him, the bodyguard grabbed what remained of the table and hurled it against the wall as if to flaunt his strength. The manager, full of confidence, then smirked and introduced his bodyguard. "This man is one of the strongest hunters, rated A overall. If you go up against him, you won't stand a chance." But Hyeon Woo only smiled lazily. Without a hint of concern, he slipped off his flip-flops and stood up. Then, in an utterly casual tone, he told the bodyguard to come at him, because he'd only be using his flip-flops as a weapon. The bodyguard's face twisted with rage. He had never felt so insulted in his life. Cursing under his breath, the bodyguard clenched his fists, ready to punch Hyeon Woo. But Hyeon Woo remained calm, holding a flip-flop in his right hand. The moment the bodyguard's fist was about to land, Hyeon Woo swiftly smacked his flip-flop straight into the man's face. The impact was brutal. The bodyguard was knocked out instantly, his body flung backward until he crashed into the wall, half of his torso embedded inside from the sheer force. The manager, witnessing this, was utterly stunned. He had seen Hyeon Woo's training assessment footage before. Back then, he did think Hyeon Woo was stronger than expected, but in his mind, he still saw him as nothing more than a frog trapped in a dungeon, thinking he was the strongest in the world. In this scenario, he had envisioned the power and influence of the Aries Guild should have been enough to make Hyeon Woo kneel, but reality had completely flipped his expectations. His bodyguard had been completely wrecked by nothing more than a flip-flop. The manager's thoughts raced. How was this even possible? Hyeon Woo had no magic, yet his strength was overwhelming. It simply didn't make sense. His thoughts were cut short when Hyeon Woo casually began walking toward him. In a calm yet terrifying voice, Hyeon Woo asked, "Do you know what I hate the most?" The manager, now backing away in fear until his back was pressed against the wall, couldn't find the words to respond. Hyeon Woo continued, "I hate people who try to threaten me." With his flip-flop, now half destroyed from smashing the bodyguard, Hyeon Woo delivered the same attack straight at the manager. Later that night, Hyeon Woo stayed at Si-hyun Kim's apartment. Si-hyun, who had already heard what happened, warned him, "You should be careful. The Aries Guild is dangerous." But Hyun-woo, casually enjoying a fresh strawberry, simply chuckled and asked, "What's so dangerous?" Si-hyun sighed. "They don't play around, Hyun-woo. Most people avoid getting into trouble with them." Still relaxed, Hyun-woo asked, "And how exactly do they handle problems?" Si-hyun explained, "They can blacklist you, making sure no other guild will take you in, and if things get worse, they can even take you out in a labyrinth, making it look like an accident." Hyun-woo took another bite of his strawberry, savoring its sweetness. Didn't think they were that ruthless. But to Si-hyun, the real ruthless one here was Hyun-woo himself. With a worried expression, Si-hyun offered, "Why don't you just join my guild? You'd be safer that way." But Hyun-woo simply shook his head. "I already told you, I'm not joining any guild." Si-hyun frowned. "Don't you want to live peacefully?" Hyun-woo let out a small sigh. "I do, but I'll have to put that on hold for now. There's something I need to take care of first." Then he suddenly asked, "Have you heard of Aderon Laboratory?" Si-hyun looked confused, but Hyun-woo kept his thoughts to himself. 12 years. For 12 years, he had been trapped inside that tower. Why was he the only one who couldn't leave? Why was he forced to stay? These unanswered questions, his bottled-up frustration, had been building inside him for far too long. Who built that tower? Why did they imprison him for 12 years? Whoever was behind it, Hyun-woo was going to make them suffer the way he did. Si-hyun, noticing his serious expression, asked, "Why are you suddenly asking about that place?" But Hyun-woo didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Do you know anything about that dungeon?" Si-hyun nodded. "Aderon Laboratory? It's a C-rank dungeon in Wheejeongbu. It's considered a great place for rookie hunters to level up." But then he hesitated. "Though, I don't think you can get in." Hyun-woo frowned. "Why not?" Si-hyun sighed. "Like I said earlier, the Aries Guild monopolizes most dungeons, and Aderon is one of them." Hyun-woo's expression darkened. "How is that even possible? Doesn't the government step in? Isn't there some kind of anti-monopoly law?" Si-hyun replied calmly, "The government and politicians don't care about hunters. To them, we're not worth the trouble." He paused before adding, "Think about it. How many people actually make it out of the tutorial tower and become real hunters?" Hyun-woo paused for a moment, then asked again, "But I've heard people are getting killed inside the dungeon. Isn't that murder?" Si-hyun explained, "Dungeons are extremely dangerous. No police officer would bother investigating. They just call it an accident." Hyun-woo furrowed his brows even deeper. "This is completely messed up," he muttered. Si-hyun continued, "On the outside, Ares is seen as a leading company in this new industry. They pay their taxes on time, and the hunter profession outside the tower is highly respected by the public." Hyun-woo got up from his seat. "What if I sneak in?" Si-hyun immediately warned him. "There are Ares members guarding the place 24/7. Hyun-woo thought for a moment before coming up with another plan. "Then I'll just walk in through the front door." Si-hyun was shocked. "If you do that, you'll make an enemy of the entire Ares Guild." He reminded Hyun-woo of what happened earlier when he beat up the guild manager and the bodyguard, but Hyun-woo simply shrugged. The damage was already done. Meanwhile, at the Ares Guild headquarters, the higher-ups were discussing their expansion plans into China. One of them mentioned that the process would take at least 5 months. Seon-woo, the head of Ares Guild in Korea and an S-class hunter, asked, "How long would it take to expand into Russia or Japan?" A subordinate answered, "For Russia, at least 8 months. For Japan, around 7. Seon-woo smirked. "It doesn't matter if it takes time. What matters is that we stay one step ahead of the competition." He compared the situation to hunting. "We don't have to run faster than the dungeon boss. We just need to run faster than everyone else." He then instructed his subordinates to continue monitoring the progress. Not long after, a subordinate handed Seon-woo a report, an analytical breakdown of Hyun-woo's stats that he had requested. As Seon-woo reviewed the data, he was puzzled. Hyun-woo excelled only in strength, agility, and stamina. The rest of his stats were just average. "Is the machine broken?" he asked. The subordinate shook his head. "We had doubts too, but the analysis team confirmed the data is accurate. No matter how much of a margin of error there is, the results remain the same." "Have we tried recruiting him?" "We did, but he turned us down." Seon-woo pondered for a moment. Recruiting someone like Hyun-woo could be beneficial at first, but if he failed to meet expectations, it could backfire. "A poisoned apple," he murmured. "Looks delicious on the outside, but deadly if you take a bite." After a brief silence, he finally said, "Forget recruiting him. Hurt him instead." The subordinate nodded in agreement. Elsewhere, at Cheonbosan Mountain in Wheejeongbu, right at the entrance of the C-class dungeon, Aderon Laboratory, a woman was pleading with the guards to let her in, but the guards refused since she didn't have an entry ticket. With a hesitant expression, the woman explained that this was the only place she could hunt. With an irritating smirk, one of the guards sneered, "Then go to the labyrinth. Plenty of low-level monsters there. It's free after all." Another guard laughed. "If she really goes there, she might not come back alive." As they were still arguing, Hyun-woo arrived at the scene. The guards glanced at him, dressed in sportswear, carrying no equipment. "There's no public restroom here. Go to the forest instead," one of the guards barked. Hyun-woo looked at him calmly. "I'm here because I have business inside this dungeon, not to look for a toilet." The guard's anger flared. "This place is no joke. It's filled with monsters," he shouted. Hyun-woo stepped closer, a small smirk forming on his lips. With an intense gaze, he casually said, "Are you stupid?" The guard grew even more furious, seeing the man in front of him, acting all high and mighty. He spoke with authority, trying to assert dominance, saying that people like Hyun-woo should know their place. But instead of reacting, Hyun-woo just casually bent down. With complete ease, he took off one of his sandals and said, "I can't just let this slide." The guards were utterly confused and enraged. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. With a faint smile on his face, Hyun-woo gestured for one of the guards to come closer, but instead of complying, the guard only grew angrier, barking at him and calling him insane. Before he could finish his sentence, Hyun-woo swung his sandal with lightning speed, striking the guard square in the face. The impact was so powerful that the guard was sent flying backward, crashing into the metal fence behind him. The fence shattered into pieces, and the guard lay motionless, unconscious. The remaining guard stood frozen, eyes darting back to his fallen comrade, now sprawled out and unmoving. Shock and fear took hold of him. Amidst the tense silence, he heard Hyun-woo casually mumble that he should have controlled his strength better. Hyun-woo then turned to the trembling guard, stepping closer. Without hesitation, he demanded the man's shoes. Confused, the guard stammered, asking what Hyun-woo meant by that. But Hyun-woo simply shot him a cold, piercing stare and asked, "Do you want to end up like him?" Overwhelmed with fear, the guard quickly removed his shoes and handed them over without another word. Hyun-woo slipped them on and nodded in satisfaction. "Not bad," he muttered, steel-toed, yet still light. Meanwhile, the guard stood there in despair, knowing full well how expensive those shoes were. Noticing his expression, Hyun-woo smirked. "Relax, I'm not that cruel." He tossed his old, broken sandals at the guard as compensation, then casually walked into the dungeon, completely ignoring the man's silent misery. Elsewhere, in Seongnam District, at the Seoul Guild headquarters, Seo Yong was furious with Si-hyun Kim. "You just let him go?" she snapped. Si-hyun defended himself. "He left on his own. There was nothing I could do to stop him." Seo Yong clenched her fists in frustration. She voiced her concern about Ori's guild's cunning nature. Si-hyun, though he agreed, reminded her that Yeon-woo was as stubborn as they came. No amount of reasoning would ever change his mind. Seo Yong sighed, finally admitting how difficult it was to deal with someone like him. She recalled Hyun-woo's nature, how he was usually calm and composed, but the moment he made an enemy, he wouldn't stop until he crushed them completely. Meanwhile, deep inside the C-rank dungeon, a figure stood at its core, Adoran, the dungeon boss. He had the unsettling appearance of a mad scientist, his grin twisted with obsession, his eyes filled with manic delight. Nearby, a group of hunters crouched in the shadows, carefully observing Adoran's movements. They knew taking him down wouldn't be very profitable. That's why Ares Guild had never bothered with this dungeon. Whispering amongst themselves, the hunters discussed their strategy. They were well aware that Adoran had high defense but weak attacks. With the right tactics and teamwork, they believed they could take him down. Just as they were about to move, their plans came to a sudden halt. Someone was walking straight into the boss's territory. Their eyes widened in disbelief. It was Hyun-woo. He strolled into the boss room with the same casual ease as if he were taking a leisurely walk. Now, he stood face to face with Adoran. The dungeon boss erupted into laughter, the sound echoing through the chamber. His face twisted with eerie excitement, as if he had just found a new plaything. With crazed enthusiasm, Adoran spoke, his voice dripping with anticipation. "So, where should we start the experiment? The eyes, the heart, or maybe the spine?" His grin widened as he stared at Hyun-woo with uncontained excitement. "Just say the word," he cackled. "Whichever you choose, I'll make sure to handle it perfectly." Hyun-woo's childhood was filled with sorrow. After losing both of his parents in an accident, he was left in an orphanage. His uncle took all the inheritance that rightfully belonged to him, leaving the boy with nothing but despair. Perhaps due to his disappointment with the adults around him, Hyun-woo grew up to be a kind-hearted person. However, if anyone tried to control or suppress him, he would turn against them. In such situations, he often displayed extreme tendencies, unleashing everything on his opponent. Back in Adoran's lab, the dungeon boss was still reveling in his excitement. To him, Hyun-woo was nothing more than a new test subject. But his joy was short-lived. With a swift motion, Hyun-woo delivered a devastating kick to Adoran's head, obliterating the dungeon boss in an instant. The party of hunters, who had been watching from a distance, stood in stunned silence. None of them had expected Adoran to be taken down with a single strike. Hyun-woo pulled up his system interface and saw the notification confirming the completion of Adoran's dungeon. Wasting no time, he set his sights on his next destination, Forest Village. The party, now realizing who was standing before them, felt a chill run down their spines. His signature hairstyle, his casual sportswear. There was no doubt about it. This man was the master, the #1 ranked hunter. They could hardly believe their eyes. At the Korean branch of Aries Guild, deep in the management sector on the fifth basement floor, the head of HR met with Cheon-myung-woo, the branch's chief of operations. The HR head requested that Cheon-myung educate Hyun-woo properly. However, he also added that, regardless of the method used, it was fine if things got a little extreme. Cheon-myung raised an eyebrow. "Is that your personal request?" The HR head sighed. Hyun-woo rampaging through our dungeon and taking down our guards has tarnished Aries Guild's reputation. Cheon-myung listened carefully, then gave a small nod. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll handle him myself, and I won't go easy on him." Satisfied with that answer, the HR head nodded and left the room. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Hyun-woo was busy playing with his new phone. Si-hyun had bought it for him, hoping to make communication easier. But 3 hours had passed, and Hyun-woo was still completely engrossed in taking random pictures. Annoyed, Si-hyun finally spoke up. "That forest village dungeon you asked about, my guild is in charge of it." Hyun-woo barely paid attention. Si-hyun continued. "Right now, there's no boss monster inside." That got Hyun-woo's attention. He immediately turned to Si-hyun, surprised. "What? Why not?" Si-hyun sighed and explained. "Dungeons in the real world are different from the tutorial tower. In the tower, monsters, including bosses, regenerate within a day. But in real-world dungeons, bosses take much longer to respawn." Hyun-woo's curiosity grew. "How long does the Forest Village boss take to regenerate?" "About a month," Si-hyun answered. "The last one was taken down 4 weeks ago, so it should respawn in the next 2 or 3 days." Hyun-woo nodded, relieved that he wouldn't have to wait too long. Then, he asked about the Invisible Swamp Dungeon. Si-hyun hesitated. "I don't know much about that one. Aries Guild has a monopoly over it." Hearing that, Hyun-woo's expression darkened. Even catching monsters had become complicated because of the influence of major guilds. Si-hyun, sensing his frustration, offered a suggestion. "You should register with the Hunter Association's ranking system. That way, you'll get access to more facilities, including support from the association. Not to mention, the pay isn't bad." At the mention of money, Hyun-woo's eyes lit up. "Wait, I can get paid just for signing up?" Si-hyun chuckled. "Not exactly. Every 2 to 3 months, you'll need to show your performance." He then explained the payment system based on ranking. Rank B hunters receive 1.3 million won, Rank A hunters receive 2.5 million won, and Rank S hunters receive 7 million won. Hearing those numbers, Hyun-woo's excitement skyrocketed. Without hesitation, he turned to Si-hyun and insisted, "Take me to the Hunter Association first thing tomorrow." The next day, Hyun-woo and Si-hyun visited the Hunter Association to use the ability assessment facility. As Hyun-woo prepared to register, the receptionist asked for his name. The moment Hyun-woo introduced himself, the receptionist immediately asked if he was the same Hyun-woo who had just emerged from the tower after 12 years. Hyun-woo casually confirmed it, while the receptionist, though trying to hide his curiosity, was visibly surprised. He assumed that Hyun-woo was just an average hunter, whose reputation had been exaggerated by baseless rumors. Confidently, he handed Hyun-woo the investigator's eye, an artifact capable of displaying a person's status in a holographic format and determining their class. Without saying much, Hyun-woo took the device and placed it on his hand. A hologram appeared. Initially, the display showed Hyun-woo as a B-rank hunter, and the receptionist found the result quite ordinary. He thought that if Hyun-woo was truly as famous as the rumors claimed, his rank should at least be B+. However, as he took a closer look to confirm the details, his face suddenly turned pale. Shocked, he let out a loud gasp, as if he had seen something impossible. It turned out that all of Hyun-woo's stats were at A rank. This revelation was earth-shattering. Never before had there been a hunter with a flawless assessment like this anywhere in the world. His stats even rivaled those of the world's #1 hunter. Within hours, news of Hyun-woo spread like wildfire. The internet was flooded with discussions about the newcomer with unprecedented stats. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo was casually scrolling through his phone, reading the news about himself. He looked surprised. His assessment results had only been released a few hours ago, yet the whole world already knew. As Si-hyun drove, he chuckled and said, "Well, what can you do? You're famous now?" He then warned Hyun-woo that the Aries Guild must have already seen the test results. Knowing them, they wouldn't stay quiet, especially after Hyun-woo had interfered with one of their dungeons. "They're probably gathering intel on you as we speak, so be careful," Si-hyun added. But Hyun-woo remained unfazed, casually scrolling through his phone. Suddenly, he burst into laughter after coming across a video online. In the clip, a hunter was striking a dramatic hero pose. Hyun-woo smirked. "Hunters these days sure are weird." Si-hyun let out a sigh. "That's me." Hyun-woo immediately froze, his laughter dying in his throat. An awkward silence filled the car. After a moment, Hyun-woo hesitantly asked, "Si-hyun, do you even have a real job?" Si-hyun glanced at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Hyun-woo explained, "Seo-kwan and Seo-young always seem busy, but you seem to have a lot of free time." Si-hyun furrowed his brows. "I'm busy too, you know. I'm the guild leader. Right now, I'm just making time for you." Hyun-woo chuckled softly at the response. Meanwhile, at Ares Guild, deep in the management office's basement on the 5th floor, the head of HR was staring at a monitor with a frustrated expression. On the screen was Hyun Woo's assessment. Everything ranked at A. The guildmaster had ordered him to eliminate Hyun Woo. But after seeing these overwhelming stats, he felt nothing but a splitting headache. A man beside him tried to reassure him. In a confident tone, he said there was no need to worry too much. He revealed that he had already summoned Cheonkang Shin, a hunter from China, who was on the verge of reaching S rank. Upon hearing this, the head of HR smirked. It seemed they still had a chance to handle Hyun Woo. That night, Hyun Woo headed to the Forest Village dungeon, which was managed by Si Hyun. The dungeon boss was expected to regenerate soon, and he was preparing for the upcoming battle. Accompanying him were Si Hyun and another man who appeared to be a porter. The three of them entered the dungeon at a leisurely pace, unaware that someone was following them in the shadows. The hidden figure grinned, believing he had found his prey. Danger now loomed over Hyun Woo and his team. On the way to the dungeon, Hyun Woo turned to the man with them. The man introduced himself as Park Ga-moon, a support-type hunter responsible for carrying monster drop items. Curious, Hyun Woo asked what exactly that meant. Si-hyun then explained that items obtained after defeating a dungeon boss could be exchanged for money. Their prices varied depending on the market, usually ranging from 20 to 35 million won. Hyun Woo, surprised by the price, still thought those items were useless. Si-hyun casually responded that someone dressed like Hyun Woo wouldn't understand. He added that the items could also be used to craft weapons or armor. Park Ga-moon then asked for permission to record Hyun Woo. Hyun Woo didn't mind and asked if recording could make money. Ga-moon nodded, explaining that earnings came from view counts and ad revenue. With a wide grin, Hyun Woo agreed, but only on one condition: an 80-20 profit split in his favor. Ga-moon broke into a cold sweat at the demand, but he didn't dare refuse. As they continued walking, Si-hyun handed Hyun Woo a map. He explained that the dungeon was structured like a labyrinth, so the map would help them avoid getting lost. Hyun Woo examined it carefully, scrutinizing every detail, but after a few moments he furrowed his brows, then casually tossed the map away. Si-hyun could only sigh in frustration. Eventually, they arrived at a massive forest, stopping in front of an enormous tree. Hyun Woo turned to Ga-moon and instructed him to start recording properly. Getting into position, Hyun Woo clenched his fist, channeling his power into his right hand. Once he was ready, he delivered a devastating punch to the giant tree before him. The impact was catastrophic. The ground caved in, every tree in its path vanished, and the entire forest flattened as far as the eye could see. Si-hyun and Ga-moon stood in shock, their mouths agape, while Hyun Woo remained completely unfazed, as if this were routine. At the far end of the newly cleared path stood a colossal, two-headed monster, the twin-headed ogre. Ga-moon, still recording, felt like he was witnessing something unreal. He never expected Hyun Woo to clear a path to the dungeon boss with a single punch. Hyun Woo casually signaled Ga-moon to come closer and keep filming. As the twin-headed ogre prepared to attack, Hyun Woo swiftly focused his power into his legs and leaped high into the air, causing the monster's strike to miss completely. Landing right on the ogre's shoulders, he wasted no time, delivering a powerful kick straight to one of its heads. The result? The twin-headed ogre collapsed instantly, completely defeated. Ga-moon was speechless. He continued recording with a stunned expression, muttering that Hyun Woo was truly on another level. Standing triumphantly atop the fallen boss monster, Hyun Woo remained calm, while Ga-moon excitedly praised how incredible the scene was. However, none of them noticed a mysterious figure watching them from the trees above. Meanwhile, at Ares Guild's management office in the basement of the 5th floor, Cheonkang Shin was discussing Hyun Woo's strength with the guild staff. He stated that he had thoroughly analyzed Hyun Woo's abilities. Just as the rumors suggested, Hyun Woo was a monster. Cheonkang Shin even admitted that Hyun Woo's power was extraordinary, despite being purely physical, completely devoid of magic or skills. He continued, saying that Hyun Woo's weakness was obvious, and he knew exactly how to exploit it. The Ares Guild staff then informed Cheonkang Shin that tomorrow Hyun Woo would be entering the Invisible Swamp Dungeon, one of their controlled territories. Cheonkang Shin smirked, declaring that he would arrive early to prepare for his encounter with Hyun Woo. The next day, at the entrance of the Invisible Swamp Dungeon, Hyun Woo stood still, glancing around. Something didn't feel right. A strange sense of unease lingered in his mind. Just then, his phone buzzed. A message from Seo Yong popped up, reminding him about what he had said regarding the Ares Guild. Hyun Woo sighed, mumbling that they were worrying too much. Slipping his phone into his pocket, he walked toward the dungeon entrance with a relaxed expression and muttered, "Ares or whatever, I don't care." Before heading to the dungeon, Hyun Woo met up with Seo Yong. With a worried expression, Seo Yong asked why he insisted on going to a dungeon managed by the Ares Guild. Hyun Woo casually replied that he had something to take care of there. Curious, Seo Yong pressed further. "What exactly do you need to do?" But with a mysterious smile, Hyun Woo simply said, "I'll tell you when the time comes." Seo Yong tried to confirm once more. With a serious tone, she asked, "You're not doing this just to mess with the Ares Guild, are you?" Hyun Woo responded with a wide grin. "That's part of it, too." Seo Yong was taken aback, feeling a mix of shock and frustration. She knew that no amount of concern would change his decision. In the end, she gave up and simply warned him to stay out of trouble with the Ares Guild. She advised Hyeon Woo to finish his business quickly and leave the dungeon before things got messy. Seo Yong also reminded him that the invisible swamp dungeon was an A-rank dungeon, dangerous enough on its own. She suspected that the Ares Guild was waiting for the dungeon boss to regenerate so they could swoop in and claim it. Hyeon Woo listened to her concerns, then smiled and said, "Thanks for the advice. Don't worry, I'll be fine." However, as Seo Yong expected, avoiding the Ares Guild was nearly impossible for Hyeon Woo. When he arrived at the dungeon entrance, several Ares Guild members blocked his path. The thugs of Ares Guild sneered at Hyeon Woo, looking down on him for his plain attire. Hyeon Woo met their gazes calmly and said, "Why haven't you changed? Even after I left the tower, you're still just as arrogant." His words struck a nerve. The thugs, feeling insulted, spat out curses and tried to intimidate him by flaunting their guild's name. One of them even drew his sword and lunged at Hyeon Woo. But without breaking a sweat, Hyeon Woo effortlessly took them all down. Once it was over, he walked straight into the dungeon without looking back. Inside, Hyeon Woo strolled leisurely through the swamp. But lurking in the darkness, a pair of sharp eyes tracked his movements. The monster, a mega alligator, slowly crept closer, locking onto Hyeon Woo as its prey. Mega alligators were known for their incredibly tough, magic-resistant skin. On top of that, their teeth were highly valuable on the market. Sensing the monster's presence, Hyeon Woo grinned. "Looks like my prey has arrived," he muttered. Without hesitation, he launched a powerful kick. The sudden attack caught the mega alligator off guard. It hadn't expected its opponent to be this strong. With a confident smirk, Hyeon Woo said, "Let's wrap this up quickly. I'm taking everything." Realizing the danger, the mega alligator instinctively tried to escape. But before it could flee, Hyeon Woo swiftly grabbed both of its tails. With a psychotic grin, he asked, "Ever heard of the giant swing?" The mega alligator shuddered. Without wasting a second, Hyeon Woo spun the monster around like a propeller. Then, with full force, he hurled it toward the nearby cliff. The impact was devastating. The cliff cracked, leaving a deep imprint of the mega alligator's body. Humiliated, the mega alligator refused to back down. It unleashed a dark purple aura, a sign that it was getting serious. In an instant, it appeared right in front of Hyeon Woo, ready to strike. But Hyeon Woo remained unfazed. "Still want to fight? Fine, I'll end this now." However, something unexpected happened. Just as Hyeon Woo was about to land the final blow, his legs suddenly wouldn't move. A powerful magic chain had wrapped around him, completely restricting his movements. Hyeon Woo glanced down in confusion. This wasn't the work of the monster. At that moment, the mega alligator opened its massive jaws and lunged at him, its razor-sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. From atop the cliff, Cheonkang Shin watched the scene unfold, a sly grin forming on his face. "It's over for you, Hyeon Woo," he murmured, satisfied with the trap he had set. In that moment, Hyeon Woo quickly used his unchained hands as support to dodge the mega alligator's attack. He glanced down at his bound legs, wondering what kind of magic had trapped him. Suddenly, a voice from the top of the cliff answered his silent question. "That would be a magic chain." Hyeon Woo turned toward the voice and saw a man standing at the edge of the cliff. It was Cheonkang Shin. With a victorious grin, Cheonkang Shin continued, "This skill is perfect for capturing you." As he spoke, he confidently leaped down from the cliff, introducing himself as the one sent by the Ares Guild to deal with Hyeon Woo. Still seated casually, Hyeon Woo asked calmly, "So, you're basically a hitman hired by the Ares Guild?" Cheonkang Shin smirked. "Quick on the uptake, aren't you?" he replied as he approached. With a satisfied tone, he praised Hyeon Woo. "I have to admit, you're impressive. Just now, I saw you swinging that mega alligator around like a toy and kicking the twin-headed ogre into oblivion. That was incredible." But his voice quickly turned sharp. "But can you still do that while bound by this magic chain?" At first, Hyeon Woo remained relaxed, not taking the threat seriously. However, after attempting to break free, he realized that the chains weren't coming off. His expression shifted slightly. Seeing this, Cheonkang Shin grinned in satisfaction. "To break free from these chains, you'd need magic stronger than mine, and it has to be at least A rank. But you don't even have magic power. Do you even realize how bad your situation is?" he mocked. But Hyeon Woo stayed unfazed. He looked at Cheonkang Shin with a blank face and asked, "Bad situation? I don't feel that way." Hyeon Woo's nonchalant attitude, completely unaffected, made Cheonkang Shin irritated. Still, he tried to reassure himself and said, "People like you always pretend to stay calm while secretly scheming an escape. That cheap trick won't work on me." Hyeon Woo just stared at him, looking as clueless as ever, which only made Cheonkang Shin lose his patience. Furious, Cheonkang Shin drew his sword from his back and prepared to attack. With lethal, venomous magic, he unleashed a powerful strike at Hyeon Woo. A massive explosion erupted, engulfing the area in thick smoke. Cheonkang Shin smirked, confident that his attack had finished Hyeon Woo off. However, as the smoke began to clear, he saw a silhouette. Hyeon Woo was still sitting there, unbothered, untouched. With an innocent expression, Yanwu looked at him and asked, "What exactly are you trying to do?" Cheonkang Shin froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. Slowly, Yanwu stood up, and the magic chains that once bound his legs simply fell off, as if they had never existed. Panicking, Cheonkang Shin lunged forward, swinging his sword with full force. But before the blade could even reach Haiyan Wu, his fist had already landed square on Cheonkang Shin's face. The punch sent him flying backward, slamming him into a tree with a violent crash. As Haiyan Wu casually walked toward the fallen man, he said, "If you wanted to capture me, you should have chained my whole body, not just my legs." He glanced at the tree where Cheonkang Shin was pinned, then kicked it. With a single strike, the entire tree collapsed. Cheonkang Shin let out a terrified scream, realizing just how screwed he was. Haiyan Wu stared down at him coldly and said, "If you wanted to kill me, you should have been ready to face the consequences." Without another word, Haiyan Wu lifted the fallen tree, Cheonkang Shin still on top of it. And with one powerful motion, he hurled the entire thing straight into the swamp, right onto the mega alligator that had been resting in the water. The monster let out a furious growl, now caught in the chaos as well. Meanwhile, Cheonkang Shin, still clinging to the tree, screamed in panic as he was flung deep into the swamp. Unfortunately for him, he became nothing more than a meal for the starving mega alligator. All that remained was the sound of the swamp's water churning. Suddenly, a notification window appeared in front of Haiyan Wu, informing him that he had completed the lowest tier validation mission. Haiyan Wu stared at the notification, looking both confused and surprised. Meanwhile, at the Aries Guild's headquarters, specifically in the management office on the 5th basement floor, someone rushed in urgently to report to the management staff. With a grim expression, he delivered the bad news. Cheonkang Shin was dead. He explained that the tree Cheonkang Shin had been pinned to had sunk into the swamp, making it impossible to confirm the whereabouts of his body. Upon hearing this, the head of the management staff immediately concluded that the swamp monsters had likely devoured him. As he checked Cheonkang Shin's status information, the head of staff fell silent, deep in thought. A hunter with 2 S-grade stats and 7 skills. Someone that powerful was defeated by Haiyan Wu? The reality of the situation made him chuckle bitterly, but that bitter laughter quickly turned into frustration. With a scowl, he cursed under his breath, furious over their massive failure. Elsewhere, in Saihyun's apartment, Haiyan Wu lay on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. He seemed deep in thought. After a long silence, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, then suddenly opened them again. An information window immediately popped up before him. His name, Haiyan Wu, was clearly displayed on the screen, along with a peculiar label in parentheses, Temporary Guardian. Additionally, he noticed a new skill had appeared, Status Authority. But what confused him even more was the unexpected invitation from the system. It read, "You are invited, Temporary Guardian. Time remaining, 2 hours, 34 minutes, and 21 seconds. Haiyan Wu furrowed his brows, puzzled by the invitation. Does this have something to do with the tower? He wondered. Or maybe this is a chance to uncover more information about this mysterious system. Wanting to confirm, he quickly checked his phone. The invitation was set to activate at exactly 12 p.m. Not long after, Si-hyun returned home from work. Still lying on the couch, Haiyan Wu called him over. He wanted to test his new skill, Status Authority. Focusing his gaze on Si-hyun, he activated the skill. Status Authority. A status window appeared, displaying Si-hyun's information, but most of it was obscured, making the details unreadable. Disappointed by the result, Haiyan Wu muttered to himself, "This skill is useless." However, Si-hyun, who overheard him, completely misunderstood. Thinking that Haiyan Wu was insulting him, his expression turned dejected. Realizing the misunderstanding, Haiyan Wu quickly apologized, explaining that he had just been talking to himself. The clock struck 11:58 a.m. With only 2 minutes left before the system's invitation began, Haiyan Wu remained seated on the couch, waiting patiently. He felt optimistic. Even though his new skills seemed useless, he believed that this invitation from the system was a sign that something significant was about to happen. More importantly, he hoped it would provide valuable insight into the tower. Finally, the clock struck 12 p.m. In an instant, Haiyan Wu, who had been sitting on the couch just moments ago, suddenly found himself transported to a mysterious room. The room was empty, completely bare, except for a single table and 2 chairs. Haiyan Wu took a seat, and across from him sat a woman. She exuded elegance and confidence. With a soft voice, she greeted him. "Welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you, Guardian. I am your assistant. My name is A.V." Haiyan Wu's eyes widened in shock upon hearing her introduce herself. Repeating the name under his breath, he asked, "A.V.?" The woman nodded, offering a gentle smile. "Yes, you may call me A.V., as we will be meeting frequently, for as long as you live." Haiyan Wu simply responded, "Okay," but inside, he felt a surge of excitement. Finally, someone who can explain everything to me. The reason why he had been trapped in the tower for 12 long years. However, the room suddenly fell into an eerie silence. A V said nothing, and neither did Haiyan Wu. Confused, he finally broke the silence. "Aren't you going to explain anything?" AV tilted her head slightly and innocently asked, "What kind of explanation are you referring to?" Hyan Wu's patience started to wear thin. He stood up from his seat and demanded, "You were the one who summoned me here, right? So there must be something you need to tell me." Lowering her gaze, AV spoke in a quiet voice. "I'm sorry, but I am unable to answer your questions." Hyan Wu frowned. "What do you mean unable to answer?" AV explained that she could only provide answers within the limits of Hyan Wu's current authority, his status authority. Hyan Wu's expression stiffened. "So, my status authority has to be upgraded first before you can answer anything?" AV nodded in confirmation. At that moment, Hyan Wu recalled what had happened when he tried to check Sai-hyun's status. Back then, the screen had only displayed a message stating that the information was undetectable due to his low authority. Frustration swelled within him. "So everything boils down to this damn status authority?" Once again, AV nodded, her expression serious. Hyan Wu took a deep breath before asking, "Who trapped me inside the tutorial tower?" But AV replied in the same flat tone, "I cannot provide that information. Your status authority is too low." Hyan Wu clenched his fists. "If I increase my authority, will you tell me who imprisoned me?" But AV's answer remained unchanged. "That is information I cannot disclose." Hyan Wu's patience was reaching its limit. A vein bulged on his temple as he gritted his teeth. "Then what is the tutorial tower exactly?" Yet again, AV responded in the same monotone voice. "I cannot answer that due to your low status authority." One question after another spilled from Hyan Wu's lips. Why was the tower created? What was the true purpose of the system? But no matter what he asked, AV's answer never changed. Driven by frustration, Hyan Wu suddenly struck AV on the head, hard. AV flinched, her face filled with fear. But she quickly straightened herself and spoke in a firm tone. "I am bound by the rules of authority." But that explanation did nothing to satisfy Hyan Wu. His presence grew overwhelming. An unmistakable aura of a psychopath seeped from his body. His voice turned cold, laced with menace. "Don't tell me? You brought me here just to mess with me?" AV trembled, her voice shaking as she responded, "No, I summoned you to provide information, within the limits of your authority." Trying to steady herself, she cautiously added, "There is something I can explain." Hyan Wu shot her a sharp, skeptical glare, but AV continued, her tone regaining some confidence. "Guardian? A guardian is someone who protects." Hyan Wu's expression darkened, his aura twisting into something even more terrifying. "That's it!" he shouted. AV winced but forced herself to continue, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "You are currently only a temporary guardian. If you become a true guardian, you will gain access to all the information you seek, even the things you may not want to know." Hyan Wu's demeanor instantly shifted. His expression turned serious as he asked, "How do I become a true guardian?" AV then revealed that in 5 days, a crease would appear near his current location. Deep within the crease lay a key, one that could elevate his authority. If Hyan Wu could obtain that key, he would become a true guardian. After receiving that information, Hyan Wu was instantly transported back to Sai-hyun's apartment. A notification appeared on his system screen. It was a quest. He had to retrieve a key hidden deep inside the Rift, located at Gimpo International Airport. Reading the quest details, Hyan Wu felt a surge of determination. This was his chance to finally uncover the truth behind the tower. With firm resolve, he vowed to complete this quest. The next day, Hyan Wu invited his 3 friends out for a meal at a restaurant. As they ate, he suddenly asked, "What is the Rift?" Si-hyun frowned in confusion. "Why are you asking that all of a sudden?" But instead of answering, Hyan Wu shot back another question. "Why? What is it?" Si-hyun's expression turned serious. "The Rift is an apocalypse." Meanwhile, at the Ares Guild's Korean branch, the atmosphere was tense. The guild leader, furious beyond words, slammed his fist against the table, shattering it into pieces. He had just received devastating news. The powerful hunter they sent had been killed by Hyan Wu. The head of the management team could do nothing but bow his head in silence, offering his apologies for the failure. But the guild leader wasn't interested in excuses. His voice was ice cold as he turned to Manager Yu. "Gather our strongest hunters. Kill him." To ensure success, he would also provide additional funding, a hefty sum to any hunter willing to take on the job. Without hesitation, Manager Yu nodded. "Understood." The guild leader's expression darkened as he gave his final order. "Make sure he's buried properly." His priority was eliminating Hyan Wu so he could focus on the Domination Guild, a Chinese faction that was rapidly expanding its influence, encroaching on their territory. Even now, masked forces from the mighty ruler were sweeping through Ares Guild members, further fueling his frustration. Meanwhile, Hyan Wu remained completely unfazed. Relaxing at the restaurant, his eyes were fixed on a small ring placed on the table. "So, this tiny thing is worth 20 billion? Sao Kwan, the ring's owner, nodded casually. "That's right. You can find stuff like this inside the labyrinth." Hyan Wu narrowed his eyes. "What's the difference between a dungeon and a labyrinth?" Sao Kwan leaned forward and explained. Dungeons only provide materials like mana stones and items you can use after defeating monsters. But in a labyrinth, you can find artifacts directly. Sai-hyun chimed in, artifacts from the labyrinth can be used immediately, without any processing. That's why they're so expensive. Hyun-woo's curiosity grew. He attempted to check the ring's status, but authority level too low. His jaw clenched in frustration. What's the point of this skill if it won't even work? One thing was clear, though. After this mission, he had to enter the labyrinth. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. With a relaxed expression, he called over the waiter. I'll take everything on the menu. Si-hyun and Seo-yong, seated beside him, instantly froze. You sure you can eat all that? Seo-yong asked, raising an eyebrow. Of course, Hyun-woo replied confidently. Seo-kwan simply chuckled and let him order as much as he wanted. But then, a thought resurfaced in Hyun-woo's mind. What exactly is the rift? The mood shifted. Sai-hyun's eyes narrowed. Why are you asking that again? But Hyun-woo didn't answer. Instead, he asked another question. Why? What's the big deal? Sai-hyun exhaled sharply before replying. The rift is a disaster. When it appears, the ground splits open, and monsters pour out, endlessly. As Seo-yong added, in China and Germany, they call it Hellgate. Hearing that, Hyun-woo's expression darkened. So, you're telling me this isn't a big deal? AV? Were you seriously messing with me back then? With a serious expression, he turned to the three of them. If the rift appeared in Korea, what do you think would happen? The table fell silent. After a long pause, Si-hyun answered, his voice filled with concern. We might be able to stop it, but even a C-rank rift, the weakest level, can flatten an entire district. Seo-yong added, smaller guilds will probably jump in first. Seo-kwan, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke, his tone cold. But Ares Guild, they'll waste time. They'll send disposable hunters first. And when the battle is almost over, they'll swoop in, acting like they fought from the beginning. Hyun-woo listened without changing his expression. Then he let out a long sigh. Trash. The single word carried all his contempt for Ares Guild. Then he turned to his friends, his eyes sharp. Eat well and rest for the next 4 days. Seo-kwan raised an eyebrow. For what? Hyun-woo simply smirked. You'll find out soon enough. 4 days passed. At Gimpo International Airport, a passenger waiting for their flight suddenly felt the ground tremble beneath their feet. An earthquake? They asked, puzzled. But someone nearby scoffed. An earthquake? In Seoul? No way. Yet the tremors only grew stronger. Within seconds, massive cracks began to tear through the airport runway. The fissures widened rapidly and panic erupted. People started screaming, running away from the growing chasm in sheer terror. A low rumble echoed from deep within the gaping hole. A new disaster had begun. Somewhere unknown, its location not specified by the author, a figure walked into what appeared to be a council chamber, filled with chairs arranged in a circle. Only one person sat among them. The newcomer stepped forward and reported, The 9th class has awakened. The seated figure looked up and asked, Fully awakened? The messenger shook their head. Not yet, but it won't be long before he receives his destined role. Hearing this, the person seated let out a sigh. This isn't the worst possible timing. Staring at a screen displaying Hyun-woo, they continued. In that case, let's see what he's really capable of. Back at Gimpo International Airport, chaos was erupting. The tremors had caused widespread panic, and the sudden appearance of the rift near the airport only made things worse. Residents within a 5-kilometer radius were urgently advised to evacuate. The airport was officially shut down, and the battlefield was becoming more intense by the second. The association continuously sent reinforcements, but monsters kept pouring out of the rift, non-stop, making the situation spiral further out of control. Even the hunters sent to contain the chaos were beginning to feel fear. Despite the steady stream of backup, the ever-growing number of monsters was overwhelming. Amid the chaos, one hunter shouted, Don't be afraid! If you panic, they'll just crush us harder. He activated his skill, Restrain, paralyzing a monster in front of him. Then, with one swift slash, he decapitated it cleanly. Another hunter nearby thanked him, but he snapped, Save the thanks for later. Get up now! But even as he tried to motivate the others, panic still brewed in his heart. There were just too many monsters. Things were spinning out of control. Where's the real backup? When will it arrive? He wondered. And then, something massive emerged from within the rift. It looked like a giant skull. The moment the hunters saw it, despair hit them like a wave. It was an A-class monster. The towering beast slowly raised its enormous club, ready to unleash a devastating blow. A hunter holding a shield rushed in, trying to block the attack, but the force of the strike was too much. He was sent flying, crashing violently into a nearby car. The monster lumbered toward him, lifting its club once more for the finishing blow. But just as it was about to bring it down, Hyun-woo appeared. With one powerful kick, he shattered the giant skull's head. Instantly, the monster disintegrated on the spot. Everyone who witnessed it froze. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was him, the master, the man everyone had been talking about lately. This video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next part.